Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Zach Collins and this is Financial Education. Today I'm going to be going a bit of a quickfire round. Normally in my videos I'd pick a topic and give an overview of that topic. Today, however, we'll go through a few different terms and give a bit more basic overview, which we may revisit a bit later. The specific terms I want to discuss are GDP, CPI, and WPI. With GDP, you've probably heard this term thrown around quite a lot when it comes to what economists talk about recessions. So what is GDP? So GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product, and essentially it's used to calculate how much stuff is produced by a country. GDP is the measure of all final goods and services in the economy. So if you've got a factory that produces clothes, the value of that production is included in the GDP. In Australia, we're very mining heavy in terms of our industry. So sale of rocks and ore, that makes up a lot of our economic output, or GDP. The other major industry we have here in Australia is education. So education is a service that we provide, and we provide the service to a lot of international students, and so the value of their tuition is included in our GDP. So GDP is used to determine whether a country is in a recession or even a depression. So the established definition of a recession is 2 or more quarters of negative growth. What is negative growth? It's when you have a contraction of the economy. Let's say the clothes factory normally produces about 100 t-shirts a year. If it produces 101 t-shirts, the economy is growing. If, however, it produces 99, that's negative growth. It's normal for time to have certain industries not grow, and that's called seasonality. So the issue becomes when all industries are experiencing negative growth at the exact same time, and that's a contraction of the economy and impacts on jobs and wages of employees. Before I move on, I just want to quickly add a subset of GDP, and that's GDP per capita. So GDP per capita is essentially taking the GDP of a country and dividing it by the total population. It's quite possible for a country to have a growing GDP, but a GDP per capita recession. Australia has had quite a few of these. We're not technically in a recession because our GDP is going up. However, each individual is actually spending less, and the only reason we're not in a recession is due to an increase in the population. This is really only a temporary solution. What a prosperous economy needs is both a growing GDP as well as a growing GDP per capita. If you're wondering what isn't included in GDP, that's basically unpaid work. So if you have a child that went to daycare, the cost of that daycare is included in the GDP figures because there's a service being provided. The job that you go to while they're in daycare would also be included in that GDP figure. If, however, you are a stay-at-home parent, then that's not counted. So not only does it impact on your normal profession, but also on the daycare figures. And so it's a hit from both sides just by having one person not work. This not only applies to childcare, but also carers looking after elderly or sick parents or spouses. So everyone should have heard of CPI. You might not know exactly what it means, but with the cost of living crisis we're going through, CPI is essentially what is causing it. Now, another word for CPI is inflation. So CPI stands for the Consumer Price Index, and it tracks the price of a basket of goods over time. If you watch the news, you'll hear stuff like CPI increased X%, and this was more or less than the expectation of Y%. Now, these predictions by economists, they're all just guesses. There's no real way to accurately predict what CPI will be in the future. Like, honestly, if that were possible, inflation would never have hit 8 to 9% in the first place, and would not have had the asset bubbles we had. Inflation is hard to predict because it is impacted by so many factors, supply being one of the main factors. The RBA is currently trying to reduce inflation by increasing the interest rates. I mean, this is actually a video in itself, but by raising interest rates, people with mortgages have less money to spend, and so there should be less demand. The issue with this is that most of the inflation over the last few years is supply-based. We've had COVID disruptions, war in Ukraine, war in Palestine. Each of these has affected supply of goods, which is impacting on inflation. Thankfully, we are seeing inflation slowly fall. However, what you need to understand is that just because inflation has fallen, doesn't mean that prices will drop. So for prices to drop, what you need is deflation. Falling inflation just means that prices aren't going up as fast as they have been. Let's say something costs $10 today. If we have inflation of 10%, it means next year it's going to cost you $11. If inflation then falls to 5%, it doesn't mean the price has gone back down to $10.50. It means the price has only increased to $11.55. So it's increased by 55 cents instead of an additional $1.10 if inflation stayed at 10%. Finally, we get to WPI, and this stands for the Wage Price Index. So this tracks a completely different index to the others. So this is related to workers' earnings. When employees get pay rises, their income rises, and as more people get pay rises, it increases the overall cost of labor. And this is reflected in the wage price index, i.e. the cost of labor for employers. So WPI and CPI are linked in that they both affect each other. When CPI rises, workers need a higher wage because they can no longer afford to buy the same amount of goods that they could the year earlier. If wages then go up as a result of CPI, it means that the cost to produce these goods then goes up. This can either be borne by the company and they have less profit, or they can pass on to consumers, which results in the cost of buying the good going up, which means inflation goes up. There's actually a term for this where it gets out of control, and that's called the wage price spiral, where wages go up, causing prices to go up, causing wages to go up, repeating, spiraling out of control. Now, we haven't seen that happen yet, but we are seeing is inflation come down and wages come up. So hopefully real wages will start to grow in the near future, and we'll see more buying power come back to employees over the next few years as their wages increase faster than prices do. Hopefully, I've been able to give you a bit of a better understanding of these three terms, and you have a better understanding of what they mean if you ever come across them. If you have any more questions, please feel free to drop a comment below, and I will make sure to answer it if I can. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.